2004, the new year has begun. This videotaped interview is being done by the Ashby Historical Society. We're participating in the United States Veteran History Project, which is a project in which veterans from all over the country have been asked to tell their stories while they were in the armed services. The tape we are making will be kept here in Ashby, and then it'll be listed and cataloged at the Library of Congress, along with all the other throughout the country that have been done. So with us this morning is Richard Lundberg, being interviewed by Janet Umfris and Ann Hayes at the camera. Mr. Lundberg, you have been in Ashby for how many years?
Well, since 1956, so that would be 48 years, 47 years, somewhere around.
Almost 50,
Yeah,
right?
50.
Almost 50 years. Okay. So where were you before you came to Ashby?
I had recently graduated a year or two before from college, and I was on a training program. So I was originally in Lynn, Mass, and then in Vermont, in Burlington, then in Schenectady, then back to Lynn, then to Syracuse, and I was somewhere around there when before I came back to Massachusetts, and I came back because I was called into the service.
Oh, okay, so I think then we better find out about all this service, how you ended up here in the service. When did you? Well, let's see, because we know a little bit about your past history. When did you join the service, and tell us a little bit about doing that?
Okay, I joined the service. I was working at General Electric when I was notified that I was going to be called into the service. I had a deferment which was canceled along with 13,000 other people in the United States. So my first attempt was I volunteered for a Navy program, and I took my interview and physical in New York State, and I was told I was going to report sometime in April 1954. In the meantime, I had been notified by the draft board that they would be interested in having me join them. So I went to the draft board and explained to them that I had signed up to this program, although I hadn't been sworn into the service yet. You don't do that until you actually show up that final day. And so the draft board said, all right, we'll wait to see what happens. But I was supposed to be called in April, and it went until July. I still hadn't been called, and the draft board says, well, it's time for you to join us. And so I went into the Army in August of 1954.
1954. Okay. And where were you sent to start with?
Well, my first introduction into military life was in New Jersey at Fort Dix, where I had basic training, and that lasted about 8 or 9 weeks. And then upon completion of basic training, and I was being assigned to further duty because I had a degree in engineering and experience in a technical field. They had a program that was available for people with that kind of a background, and it was called Scientific and Professional Program, S&P. And so I was sent to. I was assigned to the S&P program, which was part of the Signal Corps, and my first duty station after being assigned to that was in Arizona, Fort Huachuca, which had just recently been opened. It had been a base during World War II, but it's been taken over by the Signal Corps, where they had the Army's electronics proving grounds. And I was assigned to a program called Battlefield Surveillance. Most of the employees at Fort Huachuca were civilians, civil service. So I worked for a civilian boss and I, what we were doing at that point was looking at the feasibility of having a helicopter as the standard base and mounting in that some television equipment so you could survey a battlefield situation and send the information back to the commander. So what we did is we outfitted a helicopter. It was a Piasecki, which is called the Flying Banana in those days, and it was difficult primarily because the hardware available in television was still pretty much in the early stages. So they still had vacuum tubes and all this kind of equipment, which didn't mount very well as far as the aircraft was concerned.
Big equipment.
Because of all the vibration and so on, we had a problem with vacuum tubes being shaken out of their sockets and so on. But after a lot of mounting experience, we finally got it working, and we went on our first shakedown was out in California at Arturo Naval Base, where they were having a mock invasion by the Marine Corps. And we got up in a helicopter and we photographed the events, or televised the events. And that was my first assignment. After I finished that,
How did it work out? Did it work?
That was the beginning of what we saw later. The most dramatic experience was in Somalia, where they had advanced the state of the art, so there were solid state devices and the detection equipment was better. And I don't know if you remember, there was a helicopter that was shot down, and the events were televised and sent to the command base and all the way back to Washington, where the Secretary of Defense was looking at what was going on. And since that time, it's even evolved further. They have now is an unmanned aircraft with a television system in, and as well as a weapon system. And they've used it both successfully in Iraq and in that parts of the country.
So that's rather interesting to have been in on the very beginning of this.
It was primitive, very primitive at the beginning. But it demonstrated that it was possible, particularly as the equipment evolved into something much more substantial. Anyway, after White Sands, I got an assignment after Fort War Trooper. I got an assignment at White Sands, and again, I worked for civilians. And it was in a countermeasures group, what we were looking at as to ways to jam missiles. And
to what, jam missiles?
Jam missiles as they were being launched. And our missile program in those days was pretty primitive. What we did is we took the guidance system out of a missile and we brought it into the laboratory, and I worked with a very talented guy who was also a draftee like myself. His name was Joe Album, and he had worked for Bell Missiles before he ended up in the Army. So we brought the guidance system into the laboratory, and we tried all sorts of ways to get it so it wouldn't perform, and found a couple of ways to do that. We wrote our report, and that particular guidance system was being made by JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories in California. We brought our results out there and demonstrated how we jammed that particular guidance system. And one other thing we did, we took another guidance system and we mounted it in the nose of a B-36 bomber. The B-36 was an enormous big aircraft. Had 6 props and four jets. And it was used for a very short period of time. But anyway, we took our guidance system and we mounted it into the nose of the aircraft down in El Paso. I forgot the name of it was Biggs Air Force Base. And then we mounted the antenna that was actually used on the missile to capture its command signals from the ground. And we flew over the white sands, and Joe on the ground with our countermeasure system was sending signals to our guidance system. I was in the aircraft with some recorders looking at what was happening. And that was a lot of fun, very enjoyable experience.
Yes.
And then my last and final assignment was, my duty base was Fort Meade, Maryland. But I was assigned to the Mountain Company in Baltimore. And the Mountain Company had just delivered what they call a missile master, which was a big radar system that looked for incoming planes in the Baltimore, Washington area, and assigned targets to the Nike bases that were in the area. And my job, what I did with Martin is I would spend time with each of the Nike bases, particularly during a mock raid, to see how they responded to the command and so on. And then we would look at a point where they would have fired the missile and take that information and convert that back as if the plane had been on that course, would they had hit the airplane. So I did that for the last 4 or 5 months of my military service, and then I was separated in August of 1956.
That's 2 years?
2 years.
2 years. Very interesting. Yes.
Well, it
must have been enough.
It was not really a military experience as such, but it was interesting.
Well, it was certainly military related, let's
Dick,
say.
I'm surprised that you went in with an engineering degree, but you then didn't put you in the officer corps.
Well, we had an opportunity out at Fort Huachuca. There were 96 of us in this program, and they came in and offered us an opportunity to take a correspondence course for recommission.
Right.
But it meant that after you finish the course, which may take 6 months or so, then you start a 3-year tour of duty.
So you had to extend your enlistment.
And that didn't appeal to too many of us, or any of us. No one really volunteered.
Right, right. So we need to jump back to where you did get your engineering degrees and what your field was. And you were with GE before you went into service?
Yes. I did my undergraduate work at Tufts, and I'm a double E electrical engineer, and then one thing that I did happen, I didn't mention the service at White Sands. I had an opportunity to attend some graduate school at University of New Mexico, and so that was a bonus. And when I finally was separated and came back and married, and while I was working at Barclay and Dexter Laboratories in Fitchburg, I did some more graduate work at Worcester Tech. And that's about the time I finished on a graduate course level, except for certain things that I wanted to take regarding it. A lot of change when we look at what we did at Tufts. We were still in the vacuum tube area and solid state and integrated circuits, and computers came a long time after. So if you wanted to stay current, education was a continuing process.
So you were at GE before
Yes, I was
you went into service, and then
before.
when you came back, you were with the laboratory at Barclay and Dexter?
Yes. I I was going back to Burlington, Vermont. I had accepted a job at GE in Burlington, Vermont just before I got out. And I was home, I was visiting my parents, and I went to a party, a cocktail party one Saturday afternoon. I met the president of Barclay and Dexter Laboratory. So we started to talk and told him what I had been doing. He said, why don't you come up and work with us? So, so I went up there for an interview, and he showed me around, and he made me an offer that seemed to be very, very decent. So I changed from GE to Barclay and Dexter.
Who was the president then?
At that time, it was Jim Moran,
Yes.
James Moran.
Yeah.
There was a Barclay and there was a Dexter, but Barclay was probably semi-retired, and they were two separate companies. There was Barclay and Dexter Laboratories, and I worked in the laboratories, and I stayed there for about 10 years, just exactly 10 years, and I was getting more involved in the management of projects, which I missed the engineering part of it. So I went to work for the Weyerhaeuser company in their research laboratory in Fitchburg, and I was head of the instrumentation and control thing for the R&D lab. And the R&D lab was a corporate sort of thing, so we did work not only for Fitchburg, but for facilities in Washington, facilities down south. So,
Did you say Weyerhaeuser?
Warehouse. Yeah. And I really enjoyed being with Weyerhaeuser. But in 1974, they came and said, we're going to build a new laboratory out in the Seattle area, and we'd like you to come out there and join us. And so I took my wife and family out, and we toured the area, and we actually saw a house that we thought we'd like to buy. Our daughter was a senior in high school, would be a senior in high school. Son was 4 years behind her. So we flew back, and that was in October, and we were driving home from the airport. We came through Groton about 2 in the afternoon with the leaves in full bloom, and there was some tears shed, and we decided we wouldn't do that. So I was fortunate enough that GE in Fitchburg had just taken on this new product line to make their own control systems for the turbines that they made. And so I talked with them, and I spent the last 2 or 3 years at GE. And as a matter of fact, on Wednesday, I got a call from GE has moved out of it, and they had sold the Navy business I was in to a company out in New York State. But there had been a spin-off from when GE moved out. Several of the engineers decided to start their own company, and they did. And it's called Power Technology, located on Main Street in Fitchburg, right across from the library. And they have been extremely successful. They have recently been bought by a company in New Jersey called DRS, and I'm not really familiar with DRS, but just this past week they called, and I had worked on the control systems for the Seawolf class of submarines, and that was my last job before I retired in that program, and they were having some problems with. Or they wanted to upgrade some of the systems, and they asked me if I would participate. So tomorrow, I'm going down to Groton, where the ships are located, and talk to them about the program.
Interesting.
Good. Yes.
That I hope is a very short duration. I don't intend to get
You were quite involved with the closing down of GE, weren't you?
I had
Working
retired
there?
before that happened, and as a matter of fact, I retired. They scaling down, and they were offering some opportunities to retire early. Although I wasn't really an early retired. I was 64 when I retired. But if you could demonstrate that it wouldn't create a problem in the scheduling and so on, they would grant that. And one of the conditions I had was that I would be available for the next year if they needed me. And I retired for about 3 weeks, and then over the next 2 weeks, the next 2 years, I worked about a year as they were calling me in. And then followed that when Dresser-Rand bought that business, I was retained by Dresser-Rand to help them make the transition. And so I spent some time. I really didn't get around to being fully retired until probably 97.
So do you think you, with your engineering background and going into your work with the Signal Corps, which I think that's a different image of Signal Corps because you were involved in quite technical things. Do you think any of that carried over, what you did with in the military, or not?
I know that the battlefield, the surveillance technique, although it's many, it's years and years ahead of what we did. I know that the missile guidance system is completely different now. We have all these satellites that they can use for guidance. The protection of cities, the missile system is far more sophisticated. There's the Patriot made by Raytheon and so on. So these programs have continued, but they have moved ahead eons in technology.
Well, was any of that technology that you did there, do you think applicable with Barclay Dexter or GE, or was this that was electrical engineering pretty much, wasn't it?
Well, it was when particularly in White Sand, where we did some circuit development work, that was applicable to almost anything I did later on, but the techniques that we used. It was a good learning experience for me, my military experience.
That was 2 years.
2 years.
Now let's see. You said you married in there, but I'm not sure when that occurred. When did you marry Rosemary?
Well, I married in 1956.
In 56.
I got out of the service in August, and we were married in November.
So was this a long-term?
Well, we had dated before I went into the military, and then we had a two-year separation, and I got home on occasion, and she came out one time to look around the West, and but it was our courting days were 2,500 miles apart.
Good. So that was good. And then you had the 2 children.
That's right.
Beth Ann and your boy is?
It's Eric.
Eric, yes. And they're both in Massachusetts still.
Yes,
they didn't go to Washington.
No, Beth and Eric both live in Livingston. Beth works for she's the clinical director at the Butler School, which is in Northborough. And the Butler School is a secure facility of offenders who are children or young people. And it's all male, and she provides them hopefully an educational program that they will be able to use when they are released, and she works with their parents and so on. And Eric is he's the regional manager for the Keating Company, which is in Lundberg. And the Keating Company is part of a very large corporation with headquarters in Dublin, Ireland. I can't remember the name, but so and again, he lives in Leominster.
And Rosemary was an integral part of the hospital for many years, right?
Yeah, she worked in the emergency room for 27 years, and she worked the 3 to 11 shift and was the charge nurse during that period. And she had a lot of interesting experiences.
Is it at Burbank?
Yes,
Yes,
at
it was
Burbank.
Burbank then. She's not been in Leominster. She did not go to the Leominster Hospital. She was
No,
retired.
she had retired
Yeah, before it closed, right. Ann, do you have any questions?
No, but it's very interesting.
So you still are involved in the
Well,
in
yes, on a very limited.
the Seawolf? I know about the Seawolf. My grandson is really into submarines, and he knows, and he's been to ground in the Seawolf submarine.
Yeah, there were
class.
3 of that class made. The Seawolf was the first. The second is the Connecticut, and the third is the Jimmy Carter.
Oh, we have a Jimmy Carter submarine. I didn't know that.
Jimmy Carter was a nuclear officer in the Navy before he